it gets to a certain point where good people have to stand up, whether they want to be involved in politics or not. And there are things that are going on that are unacceptable. And it is time for good people to stand up with a unified voice and say, enough is enough.
Dr. Eric Cubin, today on Cowboy State Politics. The whole story that no one in the media would tell you. We've got lots to do. Come on, let's go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Weekend Update. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Saturday. Today on the program, I have a fantastic interview with Dr. Eric Cubin. I'm sure by this point, just about everybody has heard about him. He's made several media appearances, and there have been numerous articles written about him and how the governor, Mark Gordon, had him removed from the Wyoming Board of Medicine for his support of Senate File 99, otherwise known as Chloe's Law. That's the one that prevents doctors in the state of Wyoming from lopping the healthy body parts off of children. Something that just seems common sense to almost everyone, except, of course, the governor, some people in the legislature, and the absolute out-of-their-mind radical left in this country. Chloe's Law passed the Wyoming legislature overwhelmingly. In the House, it passed 55-6. The 6 people who perplexingly voted against Chloe's Law were Ken Chestick, Lloyd Larson, Carly Provenza, Trey Sherwood, Liz Storr, and Mike Yen. All but one of those is pretty much a foregone conclusion. They're all Democrats, except, of course, for Fremont County Republican Lloyd Larson. In the Senate, it passed 28-2 with one person excused. The people who voted no on it, Nancy Case, that is, Senator Cale Case, and Chris Rothfuss. Mark Gordon, as he would say later, begrudgingly signed Chloe's Law on March 22nd of this year. This really isn't the full story of Chloe's Law, because Senator Anthony Bouchard, the original sponsor of Senate File 99, brought what was essentially the same bill in the 2023 legislative session. That version of the bill was absolutely butchered, pun intended, by the Appropriations Committee. Now, why anyone would send a health and labor bill to the Appropriations Committee is beyond me. The only answer, of course, is Albert Sommers, the then Speaker of the House, didn't want that bill to see the light of day, so he sent it to one of his kill committees, Appropriations. Without getting into too much detail, that committee amended the bill to such a point that it was absolutely useless. To give you some perspective on what a hatchet job, again, pun intended, the Appropriations Committee did to Chloe's Law, the bill's sponsor, Senator Anthony Bouchard, asked several members of the House of Representatives to kill the bill on the floor. So, in an effort not to let the unconscionable criminals on the Appropriations Committee go free, the people who allowed the butchery of the original version of Chloe's Law were Chairman Bob Nicholas.
There is no doubt, from all the medical information out there, that we are in a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Henderson.
Oh, I think you got to stop and take a look at what you're doing here. I speak against this because it kind of reminds me of that fairy tale, Cinderella.
Trey Sherwood, Republican Tom Walters, Republican Lloyd Larson, Republican Clark Stith, and Republican David Zwanitzer. I was in the Appropriations Committee watching what they did to Chloe's Law. It was absolutely, without a doubt, the most dishonest display of legislative behavior that I've ever seen. None of these people should be reelected. Anyhow, back to 2024. The bill passed the Wyoming legislature and was signed by the governor on March 22nd. 1 month later, to the day, Governor Mark Gordon wrote a letter to Dr. Eric Cubin removing him from the Board of Medicine. Now, Dr. Cubin had sent a letter to every member of the House of Representatives expressing his profound support of Chloe's Law. What compelled him to write the letter, and many legislators have said that they were profoundly appreciative for him doing so, was the testimony that was given to committee by the Wyoming Medical Society. Essentially, what representatives of that organization told the House Judiciary Committee was that Chloe's Law can't be passed because that would infringe on the doctor-patient relationship. That assertion, of course, is preposterous, as you'll hear Dr. Cubin explain in a few minutes during our interview. But just because this episode is about the entire story, here is what a representative from the Wyoming Medical Society said about Senate File 99, Chloe's Law. Just to be clear, the guy you're going to hear from says that his medical society does not endorse any of these transgender surgeries, but he goes a lot farther than that. Just because some criminal act doesn't happen somewhere doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a law against it. I don't ever remember a hijacking happening in Wyoming, but yet it's still illegal. His first argument is a common refrain from all of the liberals. I'll bet you $1 you can't guess what it is. No, on second thought, I won't make that bet. Here you go.
My name is Dr. Michael Sanderson. I am a pediatrician of 5 years from Sheridan. This does not happen, and it has never happened, and it will probably never happen in the state of Wyoming. The second major opposition that I have to this bill is that it is frankly an inappropriate intrusion to the practice of medicine, and I am deeply concerned with the tone and the interest that the Wyoming legislature seems to have in stepping between Wyoming citizens and their doctors. And it seems to be an increasing trend over time. This is highly inappropriate and it is dangerous.
Pay no attention to this. It's not happening. And even if it is, it's none of your business. Right. Obviously, I edited down his comments a little bit just so I could get to his main arguments. Oh, and to tell everybody who he is. But you can go back and watch the committee hearing if you like. It was held in the Senate Labor Committee on February 21st of 2024. It was this testimony that prompted Dr. Eric Cubin to write a letter to every member of the Wyoming House of Representatives. I've put a copy of Dr. Cubin's letter to the House of Representatives at cowboystatepolitics.com. Just go to the show content tab and you'll see all the documents related to this episode right at the top. Dr. Cubin's comments to the legislature were fairly lengthy, but just let me quote one little part of it to you. Quote, "The Wyoming Medical Society seems to have teamed up with the American Association of Pediatricians in its opposition of Senate File 99. Quite frankly, I refuse to believe that the majority of physicians in this very conservative state agree with this position, and we were never polled. This position was established by several very vocal, extremely liberal members of the board. The position was then made public as though it actually represents the thoughts and beliefs of physicians in Wyoming, when in fact, this is probably not true. In their opposition to Chloe's Law, the Wyoming Medical Society has partnered with Dr. Michael Sanderson, a pediatrician from Sheridan, who is the president of WYAP. Dr. Sanderson has effectively delivered the position of his organization, but he has failed to tell you that there is another pediatric professional society that has taken an opposite position, the American College of Pediatricians. It turns out that the ACP put out a position statement that was revised February 5th of 2024, which reads in part, and I quote, "The Wyoming College of Pediatricians cannot condone the social affirmation, medical intervention, or surgical mutilation of children and adolescents identifying as transgender or gender nonconforming," end quote. As you can tell, Dr. Cubin was fairly pointed in his comments. As it relates to that, I'm going to reach out to Dr. Michael Sanderson, pediatrician in Sheridan, and see what comments he might have. I bet he's going to be ecstatic to find out that I live in Sheridan too. Anyhow, so after Dr. Cubin sent his letter to the legislature and Chloe's Law was passed, 1 month to the day on April 22nd, Governor Mark Gordon sent a letter to Dr. Cubin removing him from the Wyoming Board of Medicine for his advocacy in favor of Senate File 99. Now, I want to pause right here because There's an interesting media component to this entire story. There have been numerous articles written about Dr. Cubin's removal from the Wyoming Board of Medicine, and every single one of them reference an article written on the cow pie in which they claim that they have a copy of Governor Gordon's letter to Dr. Cubin. But what's interesting about it is the cow pie never published it. So every media outlet across the United States that wrote an article about Dr. Cubin referenced a letter that has never been published, or at the very least, that I am absolutely unable to find. Until now, that is. Now let me posit a possible reason why the cow pie didn't publish a copy of Governor Gordon's letter. Because it contains this. And I quote, "I believe your comments on this particular legislation could give doctors who are licensed by the Board of Medicine a reason to be concerned that you might use your position to advocate for a particular position when considering matters that should be considered absent an agenda or prejudice." So, accusing him of something that he hasn't done, that he's shown no indication that he would do, and calling him unprofessional all at the same time. Keep in mind, of course, that Dr. Cubin's predecessor on the Board of Medicine, Dr. Renee Hinkle, openly testified in favor of abortion at the legislature numerous times. Here's just one example. This is testimony against Senate File 34 in 2021. That was the Infant Born Alive bill.
My name is Renee Hinkle. I am an OBGYN physician here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I have been here for 22 years and have been in practice for that period of time and still active practice currently. I don't do abortions. I don't do elective abortions. And so this is not about that in any way, shape, or form. I do believe, as I am sure all of you do, as our Wyoming Constitution states, that every adult citizen has the right to her own healthcare decisions, and the state shall act to preserve these rights from undue government infringement. I will never be able to change anyone's mind as regarding pro-life or pro-choice. That is not the discussion at this moment. I am testifying against this bill because it will infringe on the right of women and families to make their own medical decisions regarding their health care.
This is just one example. Renee Hinkle, while on the Wyoming Board of Medicine, testified numerous times against any restriction of abortion in Wyoming. But the governor didn't remove her from her seat on the Wyoming Board of Medicine, just Dr. Eric Cubin. Allow me to quote yet another little piece from Governor Gordon's letter to Dr. Cubin. As I have done before, when a member of a board chooses to express personal beliefs in a way that can be construed as speaking for the body, I have elected to relieve that member of the constraints board membership requires. End quote. Well, he didn't remove Renee Hinkle for testifying over and over and over in favor of killing babies, now did he? The height of hypocrisy. Well, anyway, Governor Gordon's letter is available at cowboystatepolitics.com, as well as follow-up emails showing that the governor was in receipt of Dr. Cubin's resignation. There's one other item that you'll hear Dr. Cubin refer to during our interview. That's an organization called WPATH, or the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. A big expose on this organization was released about a month ago. The whole thing is called the WPATH Files. I've posted a copy of that entire report at cowboystatepolitics.com. It's shocking. WPATH is not a medical organization, nor is it a professional one. It's a political advocacy group. According to Influence Watch, which is that great website I tell you about all the time that tracks all of these nefarious groups that just so happen to have really flowery-sounding names to them, WPATH is, and I quote, and has been criticized for misrepresenting its nature by portraying itself as a professional association rather than as an advocacy group. The Guardian called it, quote, neither solely a professional body, a significant proportion of its membership are activists, nor does it represent the world worldview on how to care for this group of people. In March of 2024, Environmental Progress released the WPATH files, an analysis of a collection of leaked documents that indicated that many WPATH members practiced a more liberal standard of care than the official WPATH guidelines. Critics, primarily right-leaning, have pointed to the WPATH guidelines as evidence of medical malpractice across the United States, particularly regarding treatments given to transgender-identified minors. End quote. Before you even think about the common refrain from the left, well, this isn't happening in Wyoming, there are a number of physicians in the state of Wyoming who ascribe to the so-called standards of care put out by WPATH. I'm sure there are more, but two of them are in Laramie. Carolyn Kirsch, a doctor of obstetrics, and Aby Rabome. Both of them have residencies at the University of Wyoming. Big shocker there, I know. While there are lots of things in the 8th edition of the WPATH Standards of Care that we could go after, one sentence in particular says, and I quote, that the risk of regret for gender dysphoria treatment is, quote, uncommon and statistically lower than other medical or surgical interventions, end quote. That is absolutely not true. According to an article by Ryan T. Anderson, Ph.D., and put out by the Heritage Foundation, a study in Sweden found that, quote, the most thorough follow-up of sex reassigned people extending over 30 years in a study conducted in Sweden, where the culture is strongly supportive of the transgendered, documents their lifelong mental unrest. 10 to 15 years after surgical reassignment, the suicide rate of those who had undergone sex reassignment surgery rose to 20 times that of their peers. End quote. And that's just one study. So now you have the entire backstory to how Dr. Eric Cubin was removed from the Board of Medicine by Governor Mark Gordon himself, simply because Dr. Cubin wrote a letter to the legislature in defense of Senate File 99, Chloe's Law, a move that other people in his exact same position had done with absolutely no repercussion from the governor. The part of the story that you haven't heard is from Dr. Eric Cubin himself. The exclusive interview coming up next. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. Weekend Update is brought to you by Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. Are you tired of living in the communist utopia of California and think it's a good time for you to move to a red state? Well, then the perfect person to call is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. She's sold everything from big giant ranches to small residential properties all across the state of Wyoming. She's absolutely a real estate agent that you can trust. Get this, she's been known to talk buyers out of a particular piece of property simply because it didn't meet their needs. So, if you want to move to a red state, give her a call. Now, if you're the person that thought you were moving to a red state and ended up in the only Democrat county in the entire state of Wyoming, and you figured out that it's time to sell out and actually move to Wyoming, well, then Rebecca's your gal there too. Whatever your circumstance, give Rebecca Bextel a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Call her today. Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings are the experts in metal building construction. Whether you're looking for something small like an outbuilding or a barn, or maybe something bigger like a roping arena or even a giant warehouse for your business, the two guys you need to call are Nick and Jesse. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They're the best at what they do, and they've been doing it longer than anybody else around. You'll receive a 50-year warranty on the foundation, which is something that you're not going to get from any of their competitors. What they do is they pour concrete pillars and then insert steel I-beams inside them and then pour the foundation on top. That way, there's no possibility of water getting underneath your building and then ruining the foundation. So if you want a building that you can count on and guys that know how to do it, call Nick and Jesse, 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Other sponsors of today's exclusive interview are the Buffalo Wool Company. It's getting hot outside, and you need to make sure your feet stay cool and dry. The best socks that you can put on are a pair from the Buffalo Wool Company. Go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. Before the break, I told you the entire story of how Dr. Eric Cubin got removed from the Wyoming Board of Medicine by Governor Mark Gordon himself. But the part of the story that nobody has heard until right now is from Eric Cubin himself. He joined me for an exclusive interview. Here's what we talked about. Joining me on today's program is Dr. Eric Cubin. Dr. Eric Cubin is the gentleman that was, I guess you could say, asked to resign from the Wyoming Board of Medicine by Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. So first, welcome to the program, Dr. Cubin.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I ask all of my guests to do this if they've never been on the program before, but why don't you just take a few minutes and tell my audience about yourself?
Okay. I'm an interventional radiologist in Casper. I work at outpatient radiology and Casper Medical Imaging. I was born and raised in Wyoming, born and raised in Casper. I work at the same hospital where I was born.
Wow.
My wife is a Wyoming girl, fifth generation from a ranch at the southern end of the Bighorns. She's also a physician that was born at WMC. So we're both back home. I went to, I grew up in Casper. I went to NC. Then I went to UW, where I got a bachelor's and a master's. Then I did the WWAMI program. So I had to spend time in Seattle in medical school. And then I did my residency training at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. Having been in Seattle and then Madison, Wisconsin for several years, I could not have been happier to get back to the normalcy that is the state of Wyoming and get away from those places. So I came back home and my wife and I both work full time and raise our kids, and we're just happy to be in Wyoming.
You know, it's amazing when you grow up in Wyoming, the only thing you want to do is get the heck out of this place, and then you go to some other place, and then you spend the rest of your time trying to figure out a way to get back. At least that was my experience, and it sounds like it was yours too.
Absolutely. There's no other place that I would rather be, and honestly, there's no other place that I'm going to be.
Since I know that we have limited time, let's just quickly get into it. So you were on the Wyoming Board of Medicine, and for those people who don't really understand what that is, what is the Wyoming Board of Medicine?
The Wyoming Board of Medicine is the group of individuals who have been appointed to oversee licensing of physicians and PAs in the state. To paint with a broad brush, it's our job to ensure that the healthcare that's being provided by the healthcare providers in this state is done safely, and that the doctors and PAs that are here are safe to take care of people.
Okay, all right. Sounds like a pretty good group. I mean, I'm a diabetic, so I happen to know a lot of doctors. So I'm pretty thankful that you guys are making sure everybody's licensed properly and is playing by the rules, I guess, for lack of a better term. You were very much in favor of Chloe's Law, which was Senate File 99. You were pretty vocal in your support of it, at least, with the legislature. So why don't you tell me the story of how you kind of got thrust into the spotlight?
Well, thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell the whole story, because bits and pieces of the story have come out and have been in the state media and even the national news. But nobody has really effectively told the whole story. So I would love to do that. And we'll just go back to 2023, and I'm going to start from the very beginning. In early 2023, my wife and I were approached by the governor, and he wanted one of us to be on the Board of Medicine. And so it was determined that it would be me. He appointed me to the Board of Medicine. I was subsequently confirmed by the Senate unanimously. I served for a year, fulfilling the role of Dr. Hinkle, who had previously been on the board but had to step down. So I filled her seat for a year, and then the governor reappointed me for a full 4-year term earlier this year. Again, I was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, no problem. During the legislative session, I was sent a communication by a member of my church with a link to some testimony that had taken place in a Senate committee. And he said, "Do you know anything about this?" So I opened up the link, and it was a link to Sheila Bush, who is the executive director of the Wyoming Medical Society, testifying before the Senate committee in opposition to Chloe's law. So Wyoming Medical Society was openly testifying against Chloe's law to the Senate. And he was just asking me, do you know anything about this? I said, no, I don't know anything about this, but that can't possibly be right. And I'm going to find out about it. So I immediately went through all the normal and appropriate channels. I emailed Sheila and I said, I think you're misguided and I think that you're misrepresenting the physicians of the state. And I'm really concerned about what's happening here. She expanded the audience to the president of the Wyoming Medical Society, who then expanded it to the whole 32-member board of the Wyoming Medical Society, which made me very happy because I was able to, to communicate with all of them and say, hey, you guys
Just one quick question. So what is the Wyoming Medical Society? Is it just like a professional organization, or is that something that like all doctors are part of? What is that group?
So the Wyoming Medical Society is a lobbying organization that is supposed to represent the physicians and the physicians' interests in the state.
Ah, gotcha.
So they do, they get involved in insurance matters, licensing matters, and although they should not, they also frequently, under the current leadership, take positions on these hot button social issues that divide their membership. I mean, the reality is the best move they could take is to remain neutral or not have a position. Okay. And yet they are being run by what I believe is a group of woke people who are martyrs and are willing to fall on their sword. They will not reconsider their position no matter what.
Okay. Wow. All right. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and continue.
No problem. In any case, there was a string of emails back and forth between myself and the board of the Wyoming Medical Society. And I begged them, please change your position on this bill. And I didn't ask them to be in favor of the bill. I just asked them to change their position to neutral until they pull their membership. And I implored them to pull their membership, and they refused to do so over and over and over and over. Then they started stonewalling me and delay, because they knew that the budget session was only 20 days long, and that if they delayed long enough, the bill would die on the vine. Well, I knew that as well. So it got down to a critical moment where I had to do a gut check, and I had to either take action or not take action. And so I wrote an email that was a powerful email. And in the first part of it, I exposed WMS and their leadership for what they were doing and for misrepresenting the physicians of the state. And then in the second part of the email, I went on to explain exactly why it is important that we need to pass Chloe's law to protect the children in the state of Wyoming. I went to the legislative website. I got the email address for every member of the House, cut and paste into the address bar, and then I signed my name personally at the bottom of the email, and I hit send, and I sent it to every member of the House. Subsequently, by 10 a.m. the next day, I had heard from at least 30% of the House members saying, thank you so much for sending this. WMS was in opposition to the bill, and we weren't hearing from any other doctors, but because of what you sent us, I'm comfortable knowing that this is good legislation. I'm comfortable voting for it. And so the outpouring of support from the legislators was overwhelming, and the bill went on to pass overwhelmingly 55-6 through the House. The governor then begrudgingly signed it into law, and then turned around a couple weeks later and removed me from the Board of Medicine for having supported the bill.
See, that part is just amazing to me. And maybe it's just because I'm a conservative, but I looked at Chloe's law, Senate File 99, and I just thought this is a no-brainer. Why would we not want to have a regulation against lopping the body parts off of children? I mean, that's how I put it on my program, and that might be a little blatant or blunt, but to me, that's what that bill said, and it sounds like, that was kind of your feeling on it too.
Well, it's mind-boggling to me that we're even having the discussion. I cannot believe that our society has degenerated to the point where we're even seriously considering whether or not it should be legal to mutilate children. I can't believe we're having the discussion. To me, it's common sense, and that's what I said in the bill. Wyoming Medical Society, their argument was that we need to allow doctors to do this in our state because it falls under the doctor-patient relationship, and they consider it a part of the doctor-patient relationship. And that is absolute nonsense. As a physician, I can tell you that that I fully understand and I fully appreciate the doctor-patient relationship, and there is value there, and it does need to be protected. However, there are certain things that are just unacceptable, and you can call them anything you want to, but they're unacceptable. So physician-assisted suicide, that's not allowed, even though that's doctor-patient relationship. A doctor can't prescribe somebody 1,000 OxyContin pills because that's not acceptable, and it's harmful, and it hurts people. So to say that we need to allow doctors to mutilate children is totally under the guise of the doctor-patient relationship. It's totally unacceptable, and it can't be allowed.
One question I had for you before this interview is one of the common refrains from a lot of legislators is, well, this isn't happening in Wyoming, so we really don't need to bother with this. Are these surgeries happening in Wyoming, doctor, to your knowledge?
Can't say 100% for sure that the surgeries have taken place, but I can tell you that in the fallout from this whole situation, I have had more than one OBGYN come to me and tell me that they have been asked to perform the surgery for these purposes on children in our state. Wow. So I know it's being talked about. I know there are physicians who are actively considering it, addressing it, physicians talking to other physicians and asking them to do it. I also know that the hormone treatment and the puberty blockers are being used in children in this state for sure. But the sexual mutilation, they say it's not happening, and maybe it hasn't happened yet, but I don't care. It shouldn't happen, and we simply can't allow it.
Well, I completely agree with you. So I know that you come from a pretty political family. I mean, your mom is Barbara Cubin, right?
Yes.
Okay. So have you been involved in politics before, or was this for your first, jump into the political swamp?
So to this point in my life, I have been completely dedicated to my family and my patients, and that's all I know. That's all I do. And I have actively avoided politics as much as possible because my mom is Barbara. I can't get completely away from it. I was a precinct committee man for a few years, right when I got back into the state. But I quit doing that and have done my level best to stay out of politics. That being said, it gets to a certain point where good people have to stand up, whether they want to be involved in politics or not. And there are things that are going on that are unacceptable. And it is time for good people to stand up with a unified voice and say, enough is enough. And I got to, when it became clear that the woke mob and the crazy people on the left are willing to mutilate children to advance their political agenda, obviously nothing is sacred to them, and it's time for people to stand up and say enough is enough. And that's what I did here.
Absolutely. And I don't think that a lot of people know that one of the loudest lobbying voices in the entire legislature is what you call the woke mob, but it's Wyoming Equality, it's the LGBTQ lobbying outfit, I guess. But they're absolutely one of the loudest lobbying groups in the entire legislature. And sometimes it just amazes me the type of bills that they've been able to push through. And simple stuff like their opposition to the What is a Woman Act. That one kind of blew my mind just as much as the opposition to Chloe's Law that I heard, though there weren't a lot of legislators that were willing to get up and argue against that piece of legislation. Shocked me, to be quite honest with you.
Well, it's unbelievable. And they are insidious and they are tenacious. They have bullied our society to the point where they're forcing people to accept things that they know are wrong. And we can't have that. We can't have that. I mean, we know this is wrong. We in Wyoming, we still know what is right and wrong. We still know the difference between a man and a woman, or a boy and a girl. And a man can't be a girl, and a girl can't be a man. Can't happen. You can be a man that pretends to be a girl, but you can't, if you're born a man, you cannot become a woman. You know what I mean? And this is common sense, but we've been bullied into having to accept that maybe that's not the case. And I can't stand for it anymore.
So have you seen any retribution from your email or your this whole incident in your own practice, or has it just been, from the board and then the Wyoming Medical Society?
I have to tell you, the response that I have received has been overwhelmingly positive. The amount of support that I have received is unbelievable. I had no idea. I mean, I've never been through something like this, so I didn't know what to expect anyway. But what I can tell you is when this all happened, initially, I knew what I had done, and I knew that what I did actually affected change. and I got what I wanted. I got Chloe's Law passed. I got the children of the state protected. So to me, I had already won the game. And if the governor, for whatever reason, decided to take my position on the board away from me, then I still won the game because I got the law passed and I got the kids protected. So I wasn't really out talking about it. I wasn't seeking any recognition for what I did. I was happy to just quietly walk off the field and call it a win.
Right.
But then the media got a hold of what happened here, and they came to me and said, we've gotten statements from the governor's office. We've got the documents in hand. We've got Wyoming Medical Society statements. And if you want your narrative to be heard, you need to speak up right now. And so I had to speak up. I was left with no choice. I never expected the overwhelming support or the amount of attention that this thing has garnered. It's been unbelievable, and everything has been positive to this point. There have been no negative. I haven't seen any. I'm not on social media, so I wouldn't necessarily see things that are on social media. But I can tell you, I've gotten no negative feedback from what I've done. The people of this state overwhelmingly support Chloe's Law, overwhelmingly want to protect our kids, and everyone who's reached out to me has just been very thankful.
Well, I know in my travels, during elections, I do a lot of traveling, speaking to different groups. And during the 2022 election, the one topic that was brought up more than any, and of course, Chloe's Law in that legislative session, I guess it was in 2023 that it failed. But the big bill then was it was called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. And that one got voted down in the legislature. And in my travels, just about everybody I talked to could not believe that the Wyoming legislature would say it's okay that men participate in women's sports. So I think that this issue, the transgender surgeries, the so-called transgender people playing in different sports, I think that absolutely resonates with most people in Wyoming because, let's be honest, Doc, most people in Wyoming are pretty normal and have, a fairly conservative mindset. And this whole thing I think it just blows people's minds, like you said, that we're even talking about this.
Right. It's common sense. And unfortunately, common sense isn't common. What I can't wrap my head around is what on earth was Governor Gordon doing, kicking me off the board for having supported this bill that he signed into law. He signed it into law, and I supported it. And then he kicks me off the board and says that he only signed it begrudgingly. What could his motivation possibly be? And either he really thinks that we should be doing this to kids, and he doesn't like it that I was victorious in the legislature overwhelmingly, or there's somebody from this woke mob who has enough authority or enough influence with him that they can come to him and say, we need you to extract a pound of flesh from Dr. Cubin on our behalf. And he did it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I
Absolutely.
just can't understand what his motivation is.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. Mark and Jenny have kids. And to me, this entire opposition, you're being removed from the board, any opposition to any of these bills, it's just kind of mind-blowing to me. And, that's kind of why I brought up the LGBTQ lobby in the legislature, because they are loud and it's, they have an outsized voice in the legislature. So I want to ask you about one of the things that came up in an article from the Cowboy State Daily. There was an allusion to you running kind of an informal poll. And I wanted to ask you about the results of the poll, because it said that a majority of doctors you spoke to are not in favor of these surgeries or wouldn't recommend them. How big was the minority?
So let me just say this. What was written in that article was, as per usual, taken out of context. And it just came up in passing. I didn't conduct a poll myself. The Natrona County Medical Society conducted a poll. And because time was so short and there was such a lack of data, and I was saying that doctors in this state are opposed to doing this to children. Wyoming Medical Society is saying, no, they're not. The Natrona County Medical Society said, well, let's find out the best we can. And I think their poll results were 27 doctors were in favor of Chloe's Law, opposed doing this to children, and 9 doctors supported it. So, it was overwhelming. It was 75% or something like that were opposed to doing this to children. And I have to tell you that after this came out, I've been in the doctor's lounge in Casper, and, I've been traveling around the state doing different things, and every single doctor that I have spoken to has said, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Only a few of them are willing to go on record, but all of them, it's almost unanimous. And I'm talking about at this point, 100, 150, 200 doctors have said, you're right. Thank you for doing what you're doing. The problem is they are all universally afraid to speak up because they're afraid that what happened to me might happen to them.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute, because you were on the board that essentially manages the licenses for just about every doctor in the state. So do you think that if a doctor such as yourself came out in opposition to gender transitions or, any type of this procedure, do you think that there might be a possibility that there might be some retribution from the licensure board? Or, is that, I don't even know, is that even a thing? Do they do that sort of thing?
No, they can't. Well, they can't take away your license because of your political beliefs. Mm-hmm. So that is not a thing. I would have said that Governor Gordon would not remove me from the Board of Medicine for having a political belief either, because I also have First Amendment rights. And while members of boards do serve at his pleasure, that does not supersede my First Amendment rights and my 14th Amendment rights. And so I would have not expected him to kick me off the board for having done this, but he did. That being said, there is no legal pathway to affect my medical license based on what has happened here or having a position. The other thing that's important to say is that my immediate predecessor, who was on the board before me, was Dr. Hinkle from Cheyenne. Dr. Hinkle was an outspoken advocate for abortion and all things pro-choice. And she advocated in front of committees over and over and over, and she lobbied legislators openly for years and years and years, and was allowed to do so while a member of the Board of Medicine.
She was still there because her lobbying fit the agenda of the people that obviously oversee in the board. It's like politics is, it's insidious.
Right. And let me say this is the governor that did this to me. This is not the board that kicked me off. This is the governor. So the board is taking a bad rap right now, but the reality is it's the governor that did this. It is not the Wyoming Board of Medicine that did this to me. Was
there a phone call from the governor that you received before you got his letter, or was there any discussion or anything? Say, hey, Eric, what's going on here? Or did you just get the letter in the mail and that was it?
So there was absolutely no discussion. I was never asked for my opinion. I was never asked for my side. I was never given the opportunity to explain myself or what happened. And no, I did not get a phone call from the governor. I got a phone call from the governor's chief of staff, Drew Perkins, who told me, because of your email, you're being removed. Period. End. That's it. That's it. And then while I was on the phone with him, I received an email copy simultaneously. While I'm on the phone with him, I received an email copy of the official letter that had been sent in the mail that said, I'm removing you from the Board of Medicine. Wow. And it all happened so fast that it was hard for me to wrap my head around what was even going on. And at first I was like, okay, well, I guess I've been removed. And then I read the letter and I said, I guess I would rather have history reflect that I resigned than was removed. So I had a letter in hand. The letter was already in my hand that said, you've been removed. And I sent an email to Drew and I said, hey, would you guys consider accepting my resignation rather than this? And he thought about it, got back to me and said yes. So it was only after I had a letter in hand, a binding letter in hand that said, you are removed, that I offered my resignation.
Wow. And I think that that's pretty telling in and of itself. Not even giving you an opportunity to explain your thoughts on the matter, why you sent an email. It's just boom, done. You're out of here.
That's exactly right. It was done so expeditiously. I can't imagine what was going. I don't know who was pulling the strings. I don't know if it's somebody who influenced the governor and said, he's got to be gone right now. We don't like what he did. I don't know if it was the governor himself, but it was not very well thought through. That's for sure.
So in your opinion, Doc, I've read a lot of stuff on this, different groups supporting all of these procedures. I know you're a radiologist, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. Could you describe, in your opinion, what you think? Is there any science behind any of this stuff? Is the jury out on all of it? But what's the thinking of the scientific community on this, or the medical community, I guess is a better question.
It makes me so happy that you're asking that question, and it's the right question to be asking. So here's the reality is there are enormous amounts of extraordinarily low quality data on both sides of this issue. And the data that is being used to bludgeon us with is of such low quality that it would not be accepted in any other specialty of medicine for any other intervention anywhere else. If it was not being driven by this political agenda, it would not be accepted. So the quality of the data that favors this transgender care in kids is extraordinarily low. Their follow-up intervals are extraordinarily short, like 12 months or less. Again, that wouldn't be accepted in any other field of medicine, period. It's just not, it is unacceptable. And it's this low quality data with short-term follow-up that is being referred to by an organization called WPATH. WPATH is the global leader in transgender health. And based on their position statements, the very, very large medical associations in America, the American Medical Association, the American Association of Pediatrics, the American Endocrine Association, they have created their position statements based on the WPATH positions. But then it was recently leaked that WPATH is completely corrupt. They're misrepresenting their data. They have a political agenda that they're pushing. And so all of these things need to be reconsidered. And yet the mainstream media never says anything about it. It never really came out. The reality is these kids are suffering from a delusion. And it's a delusion that is very similar to anorexia, like we saw when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We don't really see it anymore because it was a social fad and a social contagion. But what we learned about anorexia was you don't engage the delusion. You don't treat anorexia with liposuction. You don't tell an anorexic person that they're fat. These kids are suffering from a similar delusion. And so what they need is love, kindness, and psychotherapy. They don't need sexual mutilation, hormones, and puberty blockers. That's it. From a medical perspective, it's cut and dry. You do not engage a delusion, and what they need is love, kindness, and therapy.
I took a lot of heat. I think it was an episode last year, and to tell you the truth, I don't even remember who I was interviewing. The topic of it being a medical delusion came up, and I made the comment, it's interesting that we have other psychologic conditions that we recognize, one of them being associative identity disorder. And interestingly enough, the numbers of confirmed cases of that and confirmed cases of actual gender dysphoria, actually they're kind of parallel, which means that those documented cases are actually really, really, really low. And, it's hearing you call it a delusion kind of just confirms that for me.
There's not a whole lot else to say about it. It is not a good idea to engage a patient's delusions when they are delusional.
I just want to tell you, thank you for what you did. I think that Chloe's Law is tremendously important. It kind of makes me embarrassed for my state that we have such a hard time getting legislation like this passed. This was the second go-around for Chloe's Law. In fact, the previous session, it was sent to the Appropriations Committee, and they absolutely gutted the bill and made it absolutely useless. So we did have a hard time getting this thing passed. And then the same holds true with the bill that was passed about protecting women's sports. And then, of course, I mentioned the What is a Woman Act. So it just blows my mind that in a state like Wyoming, we have such a hard time getting these things that are just common sense, out the door and putting them in our statutes. It's amazing to me.
Well, I have to say that, again, I didn't seek recognition for this. I didn't seek attention. I knew what I did, and I was happy to call it a win. But I was aware of what happened to Chloe's Law in the last session, and I wasn't going to let that happen. So I got on the phone, and I actively lobbied the members of the committee to make sure that didn't happen again. And I don't know that there's any way to quantify the significance of my role in this, but I can just tell you that I'm happy that it got passed, and that I'm happy that we ended up in the right place and we're doing the right thing, in that the children of the state of Wyoming are protected.
Well, thank you very much for doing that. So this is a political program, so I think I might be a little remiss if I didn't ask if you had any plans for the future.
Geez, that is something, again, as I said before, to this point in my life, I've been completely focused on my family and my patients, and I'm happy in that place. If you're asking specifically about political aspirations, That's not something that's ever been on my radar before, but I have to tell you that the overwhelming support that I have received, it's hard to not notice it. And the vast majority of these people who have reached out to me have encouraged me to run for governor. It's unbelievable. And I never saw it coming. I never would have expected it. But the amount of support can't be ignored. And so I have no idea what the future holds. We'll just have to see where it goes. But I do absolutely believe that Wyoming needs strong leaders who are true conservatives, who will do the right thing and actually represent the people in this state. And they'll do that every time. They won't just do it when the spotlight is on them. They'll do it at night. They'll do it when the doors are open, when the doors are closed. They're just going to do the right thing. We need leaders who have the courage and the character to stand up and do what's right. And so it's not something that I had ever really considered before. I don't know what the future holds, but it's something that I'm going to need to think about.
Excellent. Well, I certainly appreciate you coming on the program today and giving me your time. So thank you very much for doing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now you have the whole story from beginning to end. The parts that the media left out, the letter from Governor Mark Gordon that nobody in the media seems to actually have, or at the very least, are not going to publish, and you got to hear it from Dr. Eric Cubin himself. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll talk again on Monday. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.